really like to welcome Fiza Mughal to the Friday SimCafe. Fiza is a doctoral student at the University of Technology in Sydney. She's with the UTS Game Studio, um, but not exactly designing games, working with AI and health. So I'm going to hand it over to Fiza and she can explain everything else from there. And thanks everyone for coming. Fiza, it's all yours.
Thank you. Hi everyone. I'm sorry. I get very nervous with presentations, so I might flubber a little bit. Well, thank you for being here and being interested in the project. So I'll just get started. I am under the UTS Game Studio, but I don't really work on games. Just one of my supervisors, my principal supervisor, he has an overlap where he does serious gaming for the elderly. So we found an overlap and decided it would be a good partnership. He would be a good supervisor for me. So just starting off, oh God, my slides aren't changing. Oh, yes, okay. So just a brief overview. My grandmother had silent depression, and my mother and her brothers were always worried on how to take care of her because she wasn't communicating. She had 3 strokes, so she was nonverbal. And everyone was always concerned because they didn't know what was going on. Was she happy? Was she not? Um, and they had CCTV cameras installed and just a lot of things to monitor her and make sure that her and my grandfather are okay. Just my mother was a doctor. She's retired now, but she was always watching the camera when she wasn't sleeping. She would just be looking after my grandmother, worrying how to make things better. So I wanted to do something that would make it easy for them to rest a little bit more and just rest easy and have some mental peace, knowing that if anything happens to her parents, especially my grandmother, because she was nonverbal, she would get notified. So she doesn't have to keep looking at the camera 24/7. So started doing some reading on it because of course you have to do the literature review as well. But even before I started my PhD, I did some reading, and there's an increasing number of elderly people living alone. This could be because they want to live alone or because they just have no choice, because there are unfortunate cases where the family members just don't want to be responsible for them. Some of them want to be independent. They don't want to have to ask people to take care of them or look after them. But essentially, there's many reasons why they may be living alone. And with age, you've got growing cognitive impairment or other age-related diseases, ailments that can result in your facial features also changing or your own ability to perceive your own emotions changing. Um, and this can lead to caregiver burden. Not really burden, but I mean, your concerned ones get very stressed out. And if you have an inability to talk or move, someone might even have to quit their job and take care of you 24/7 just to be there, even though you don't have any physical dependence on them. Another thing I found was that older age people are more susceptible to mental health issues, and this could be because of socioeconomic issues or elder abuse. If you put them in an old folks' home, there's quite a few cases where there's scandals and there's exposés where you find out that they were being abused, but they can't communicate it either because they've had a stroke and they can't talk, or they're just um, silent depression. Like they're feeling the hurt, but they don't know how to communicate it. So that's one thing. And then I also looked up emotion recognition studies and found that there's a lot of studies on emotion recognition these days. It's becoming quite the focus, but not enough of the studies are focusing on the geriatric generation, people over the age of 60, as their test subjects or study participants. Um, so why I wanted to do physiological movements with the Fitbit is because a lot of studies showed that your movements that are not necessarily visible to the naked eye, they do change with changing emotions. Of course, these are really negligible movements to us as bystanders, but sensors can pick up on these things like the Fitbit. So just the statistics, the population in 2017 of the geriatric generation was about 12%, and this is supposed to almost double by 2050, where it's going to be 22%. And of this 22%, approximately 15% is going to have mental health issues. Now, the project's aim, what I wanted to do with my PhD project was essentially to find a way to monitor the mental health of this generation, or any user, because right now the focus is the older age population. But once we validate this and it works and the data set is accurate and the performance accuracy is good, it could be applied to any age group, any person that wants to use it. It could be a personalized model. But for now, for the PhD, the focus is the older generation. So I just wanted to find a way to do this in an unobtrusive way, because there is emotion recognition where you can wear headsets for your brain activities, or you wear chest mounted monitors for heart rate. But it gets very frustrating, and it's not convenient, and it's not very applicable in an everyday setting. You can't walk around with chest mounted monitors 24/7 or wear a headset. Or even facial recognition, you need to be in the frame of focus. And there's plenty of studies that have shown that your external features, your external cues, are not necessarily viable, because you could be really miserable on the inside, but you're smiling on the outside, and the facial recognition system is just going to pick up on your facial features. Or you've had a stroke and your features droop. So that's another reason why facial recognition might not also be so applicable or viable. So the solution we found for this was to use smartwatches, because a lot of people wear watches already, so it would not be so obtrusive or frustrating to wear it all the time. And take the sensor data from the Fitbit, pair it up with some machine learning agent, and train it to detect depressive tendencies in the user. Why am I doing this? Well, first of all, because I was inspired by my grandmother's ailments. And second, I think that this would contribute to reducing caregiver burden. Their caregivers are concerned once, whether it's a medical professional, a loved one, a friend, whatsoever. They wouldn't have to keep calling you up, almost every hour, or look at the CCTV cameras, or just anything that they've set up to look after you or give up their jobs to be with you 24/7. Um, that would reduce caregiver burden if they just get notified when something is in a dangerous zone. For the people that voluntarily are living alone or even involuntarily, it would aid in independent living, because if they themselves can't perceive what they're feeling, the watch itself, the our framework, it could detect it and notify them, and that would tell them, okay, if I have a depressive tendency, I should go see a physician. Again, it would potentially tackle silent depression, whether they're aware of the fact that they're depressed or not. And essentially, all of this put together could improve the quality of life, just everyday life. How smartwatch, we use the smartwatch to collect some data, and then whoa, sorry, and then train an algorithm to determine the user's depressive tendency. It's not black and white. It's not going to be, oh, you're depressed or you're not. It's just going to take the data and give it a score. And the score is something that is aligned with the geriatric depression scale, which is what we use for our data collection. So it's going to score it based on that. And depending on what the score is, it's going to notify the person via a mobile app if they need to go see a physician, or just see a medical professional for further assessment. And then finally, to ensure that this actually works, we will validate the performance accuracy and see how valid and how accurate its scoring is before it's something that can be said that this works 100%. So far, I think just around the holiday season, throughout the month of December, we collected about 12 participants and got approximately 500,000 Fitbit data points as a time series of heart rate data. We've got sleep zones, sleep patterns, and gait metrics, which is their velocity, their stride, or just the steps. And in this study so far, was using steps. The GDS is a geriatric depression scale, which is a global, physicians use this all around the world just to get a general idea of how the person is feeling before they have a consult, just to see their standing, and then they further assess based on that. There's two kinds of GDS surveys. There's the 15-point scale and the 30-point scale. I use the 15-point scale. And we got 371 self-reported mood ratings, which was a Likert scale. They rated on a level of 1 to 10. The participants were asked to score this every single day at a time of their own choosing. They can choose any time, but throughout the rest of the 4 weeks of the study, they had to fill out the survey at the exact same time. Of course, not everyone filled it out to the very minute, but they did comply by it within a 3 hour time frame of their chosen time. The GDS was supposed to be filled out once every week. That is how it was designed in the when it was validated by the original curators. So far, what we've found is, again, the adherence was good. The participants had no issue with the study. They were actually surprised as to how convenient it was. I held opening and closing interviews with the participants when they were recruited, before the study started, and after the 4 week period. The 4 week period ended around the holiday season, so the interviews for closing interviews were held about a week after. And of the 12 participants, 9 of them were available for the interviews. And they all were very interested in it. They all said that it was very easy, it was very convenient, and they did not feel any frustration. Some of them did, however, say that they would prefer not having to wear the Fitbit overnight, which is something that was very essential for the data collection period because we needed their gait metrics. So the preliminary findings, I've been doing some exploratory quantitative analysis, and I have found correlations where the GDS is more like the sleep zones are more impacted by their GDS, by their depressive tendencies. So where the GDS score was high, some of them lost minutes in some sleep zones. There were 4 heart rate zones and 4 sleep zones. Um, and we found a correlation with mood and their heart rate and steps. I will say one size does not fit all because there were participants that had negative correlations with some of the zones, while some of the participants had positive correlations. But nevertheless, the correlations were strong, respectively. Of course, I'm doing further analysis on this to see how it goes. But overall, with the qualitative analysis, with the interviews, there is a theme of people being very interested in the full implementation of the proposed framework, the prototype, once it's implemented. They said that this approach definitely could help their loved ones, it could help them, but some of them found that um, I think 2 out of the 9 participants did raise privacy concerns, but I addressed those because the mobile app will give them a choice to decide what they want to be shared if someone were to get notified. So it's up to them, and they get to decide who would get the notification in the first place. So what's next is continued qualitative analysis. I'm going to be doing a heuristic and thematic analysis of the interviews for further themes. Um, and then the quantitative analysis is ongoing, using the data sets once they're prepared, train a machine learning algorithm with linear regression um, to validate the relation and do some ground truthing. So once the classifier is trained and we test it, we're going to also do ground truthing to ensure that the accuracy is quite valid. If there is time after all of this, we will make the mobile app, the prototype, and possibly do a user case study by just giving the user the Fitbit, and they have to input nothing, fill out no surveys, have them wear it for maybe 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and see how it goes, and test about the feasibility and usability. So overall, what I expect from this research, what I'm hoping to gain and contribute with this research is to propose a framework that can monitor mental health of, well, particularly the older generation, but overall just any user in an unobtrusive manner, in a very real world applicable manner, and also find more evidence that demonstrates that there in fact is a link between mental health and a person's physiological movements and changes. Just in case anyone wanted to see, this is the framework. So we've got user input where it fetches the data from their Fitbit, it goes to the machine learning agent, and then finally it goes to the emotion reporting, which is the mobile infrastructure, the mobile app that's going to notify people. And overall, this would make an autonomous mental health monitoring framework, a system. That is all. Thank you.
Okay, that was a very fast trip through what must be an awful lot of work. So, thank you, and we've got lots of times for questions and discussion. Would you like to stop sharing, and then we can sort of have some questions? So, who'd like to ask the first question? Marcus, you're usually a pretty good questioner.
Well, firstly, I want to make a comment. I thought that was an excellent presentation, really clearly presented, and a nice set of data that you're working with. So you're probably tackling a problem that needs something in the order of tens of thousands of people working on it. So it's very interesting to see your approach. So I've seen quite a bit on this with wearable technologies, including a lot of negative feedback. So we know for fitness, for example, that if your fitness isn't improving and you're wearing a wearable technology, depression will come out as a result of that. That reinforcement and feedback loop insisting that you can't change. But I do think the watch is a much smarter technology than most of the other previous examples because it could be naturally worn. So one of the things that becomes interesting to me is what we know about feedback loops around depression is they can be very detrimental or they can be very influential on improving things. And that means you need to have a known solution to things that take you in the positive direction, whether that be for an individual going out and seeing natural light, talking with friends, seeing a clinician. There needs to be something associated with it. On the other side is you've got the reinforcement of if you are told you're depressed, it can make you feel more depressed if you can't see any way out. And so one of my questions comes to you, who should have the information? And it may vary between patients.
So when I was designing, when we were going through the ethics process, this was a question that was raised as well, that it might create like a vicious cycle where people keep looking at the watch and keep trying to see their depressive tendency. So for the pilot study in the preliminary stage, at least in the beginning, the notifications would only be sent to a caregiver. It would not be accessible by the user themselves. They would get to decide who gets the notifications, but they wouldn't. So they can choose whoever they wanted. It could be one contact, two contacts whatsoever. But just starting off, it would not be accessible by the user per se. And it is to avoid any kind of unconscious bias or further triggering their depression or making things worse.
Wow. How did the wearers feel about that?
They were actually okay with it. 2 out of the 9 interviewees did say that there would be privacy concerns because some people would feel like they're being watched all the time. But that is why it's their choice. It's not going to be forced onto them. It's their choice who gets to get the information, and it's their choice who gets the information, what information they get. I did ask the participants what information they would want if they were on the receiving end, and what information they would want if it's their information that's being shared. And they prefer just a clean app where no vital signs or such are shared. It's just if they're in a dangerous depressive zone, that's the only time it gets a notification. And they all felt that that would make them more comfortable, whether they're the ones on the receiving end or not.
Okay. So you, in doing that initial work, did you interviewed or worked with the carers, the people who are getting the data, as well as the ones wearing the watches?
No, this was just the participants, the 12 participants, the people aged over 65. It was just them involved in the study. We would interview the end users of the app, the initial end users of the app, if there is time for a user case study towards the end of my PhD.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Pip, you're in this area. Have you got any questions that you'd like to throw at Fiza?
Not at the moment. I'm thinking of one.
Okay. Karen has got a hand up. Karen, what?
I'll go. Lovely talk. Thank you, Fiza. It was really interesting. I did have a little bit of insight into this, but particularly for health monitoring, I had a PhD student who was looking at but primarily for health monitoring purposes. One question I have was obviously the watch enables you to you're collecting a time series of data, real-time time series of data, and you indicated like the 12 participants there's quite a lot of data collected. I also noticed from the results though that the greatest predictor from the initial machine learning that you'd applied seemed to be the sleep pattern associated
Heart rate
with
and
depressive state. Was that correct?
it's sleep, heart rate, and steps both. All three of them are related, but two of them are more correlated with their mood that they report
Yes.
to themselves, and sleep is more related to their depressive tendency.
Okay. Yeah, because that was just my question, was from a usability perspective. So whether, you know, obviously wearing the watch constantly, needing to put it in creates an overhead or a burden that may or may not actually have impacts on their mental health state as it is. And so if we can achieve the same objectives, but not necessarily through, for example, you know, is an hour wearing it in a morning going to give us as good an insight as wearing it over a 24-hour period? Do you get what I mean? Have you, that's where I'm trying to understand whether your research will actually look at is the full 20-hour, 4-hour cycle of data necessary or not?
So that's part of the exploratory analysis in the quantitative stage. We're gonna see how much of the data is actually necessary to to detect their depressive tendency. And I'm also going to be training the classifier with each of the respective metrics and pairing them up in different combinations to see which one gives the highest accuracy and how much of the data gives the highest accuracy. So it doesn't have to be 24 hours, but that's all part of the exploratory analysis right now. We're playing around with things to see how much of it is actually important.
Yep.
So one thing that comes to mind as a follow-up on that is your participant group is tiny. If you were to take another 12 participants and you got the same results, I would feel reasonably confident that if a second study produced the same thing, it might not. It may be that what you're doing is coming up with a model for a very small subset that includes highly willing people,
Yes.
so people less likely to be advanced in depression, and therefore it may not work for another group. But it would be worthwhile doing a second group. And as I said, you've got work for 10,000 people. Your PhD needs to be a PhD and not a complete solution. That's asking too much. But it really would be worthwhile looking to see if you were able to reproduce that set of results from machine learning of another 12 people, or whether you get totally different outcomes. And the reality is it's not representative of people, because depression can be caused by so many different types of chemical imbalances, environmental, situational, personal relations. So there's so many things that will influence it. I think it would be really, really important for you to get out there and grab a second group and see if you can get machine learning to come up with the same ideas before you focus on the qualitative. Because the qualitative from this group of people may have no representation from your broader community. I think what you're doing to have a result already is really impressive, given the amount of work that's being done on this area. And a lot of it's not very conclusive. We still can't predict people are going to leave hospital and commit suicide. And that's under the care of experts in psychiatry. So if they can miss it, the telltale signs are not obvious to see.
But that's I agree. But this one is not. It's not going to be black and white. It's not you're depressed or you're not. It's just depressive tendencies. And if someone that is already known to be very depressed is wearing it, there must have caregivers that are already aware of the depression. This solution is more for people in everyday lives that may not know themselves whether they're depressed, and their caregivers don't know they're depressed. So it's just to see their tendencies, to see if they're leaning towards a higher depressive tendency, where they can be notified that, hey, this is going to an alarming zone. maybe look into it. But if it's someone that is already diagnosed with depression and they're under professional care, their caregivers know, I don't think this would be as applicable, because we're in our pilot study, we did explicitly exclude participants that had prior mental health issues or any issues that would impact these readings. So if I were to get a second set of participants, we do plan on getting people that are more in the specific, they have ailments like Alzheimer's or dementia, or they have mental health issues already, to see how well our approach works with that cohort. But right
So
now,
I think before you jump there, you should probably repeat your current group to show
Mhm.
repeatability. I think it's interesting taking into that cohort as well. It may actually have more effect in that cohort, as long as because I like the way you've controlled the feedback loop. They're not personally getting it. It's going to someone they trust. And that's a really good feedback loop. That's one that it's saying, someone I trust might come and help me. That's likely to lead to a positive outcome rather than that negative one of seeing that you're depressed again and feeling more and more depressed, when it may be you just need 10 minutes out in the sun.
Yes.
One of the things, though, is very important, as one psychiatrist recently said to me, in Queensland Health, we're trying to introduce a parameter to detect major mental health changes that may be predictive of bad outcomes. But one of the psychiatrists said, you need to understand the difference between sad and depression, and they're not the same thing. We all get sad. We have to get sad to be happy. But that needs to be distinguished as well. So I think you need to work on repeating within your groups. You've got something there that's, I think, rare to actually be successful. So I think that's a huge thumbs up. Find out if it's repeatable first, and then you can go to understand why. And then you can see how deep it goes. Does it work for other depressive groups? And you might find it's actually superior for people who have stronger repeating signs of depression than for this group. But it would be useful if you could flag the need for help in both groups. So I don't see it's going to be a problem or a limitation. The only limitation is whether the AI has come up with something that's representative of the population,
Yep.
or such a small subgroup of willing participants that it won't transfer.
I wanted to ask a different question, Fiza, while the others are thinking about their questions. You said there's a correlation with sleep. What does that mean?
So they were asked to fill out the geriatric depression scale from a 1 to 15, and any scores below 5 are okay. Like, that person is not depressed; they're just having a bad day.
Right.
Any scores higher and the closer they are to 15 indicated that they have high depressive tendencies and they need to be looked after. But go see a physician. So when I was doing the quantitative analysis, I mapped out the correlation, the heat map. It's just I visualized the correlation, and there's 4 sleep zones. There was REM sleep, there's deep sleep, light, and just awake. And when they had for some people, when they had a high GDS score, they did not have many minutes in the middle zones, which was the deep sleep and a light sleep. They were mostly REM sleep and awake. But for other participants, when their scores got higher, they actually had deeper sleep and they were awake for much lesser times. So those 4 sleep zones were impacted. But the common theme that I found, the pattern I found among all the participants, is with their changing scores, their deep sleep and their REM and their awake periods were the ones that were impacted most. They were either going up or they were going down.
Okay, thank you.
So on that, Elizabeth, sleep is highly correlated with depression, sleep disorder. And in fact, some doctors struggle to diagnose depression if there isn't some form of sleep disorder.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's a whole new world for me. Okay, anybody, Vinod, have you got some questions? Yes, he does.
Yeah, I had 2, 3 questions, but I think Marcus covered at least one of them regarding special cases. I wanted to ask whether you had taken a cohort of problems like just cardiac or I'm a diabetic, So a
Mhm.
collection of diabetics and to get them to wear. And Marcus' idea of saying that, look, this is not something negative, this is positive. In case there is a need, we can reach out to you faster
Yes.
than before you perhaps know it. So you already covered that. But specifically wanted to know, have you covered these deliberately with certain group of common incidents or common problems like diabetics or cardiacs, etc.?
Yes, so we excluded people that had any kind of ailments that may affect their heart rate readings or their sleep patterns. Uh, so diabetes was not explicitly mentioned actually, but I did ask them if they had any ailments. They were generally healthy adults who didn't have any issues of heart. The more focused one was any history of cardiac issues or anything impacting their sleep. So I did not explicitly look into diabetes, unfortunately. But
I
Yeah.
wear one almost all the time. I take it
You
off
went-
only when I once in a year or whenever it needs to get charged.
yeah.
So I could be a willing participant in case whatever. But I suspect a certain cohort was told that this is for your benefit. Would you like to be tested? I think I would be the first to raise my hand.
Yes.
Uh,
Um,
have you covered younger, let's call them patients? Have you covered younger patients?
no, the inclusion criteria for this study was explicitly people over the age of 65 because there's a lot of studies these days that are focusing on stress management and like the chemistry that goes behind depression and sad moments, but they're focusing on the younger people. So I wanted to do a study that was taking the older generation into account because there's a few studies that have also said that they're more erratic with their movements, they're more unpredictable, and their moods change more frequently. So I wanted to train the machine learning model on that training set as opposed to just a general population. And if that works, then we'll zoom out to this general population as well.
Uh, Firstly, I'm very positive and happy that we have technology and measures which can tell us about ourselves before the doctor can do so. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Vinod.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
JB, how about all of this from a systems perspective?
Oh, hi, Elizabeth. Sorry, yeah, no, I was just thinking the questions that were coming to my mind is one of the biggest challenges we have in machine learning in particular is how do you, the process you go through in terms of validation of the model, and then how do you then grow that and ensure that you don't lose that integrity over time as things evolve? Because you do want to evolve, but you want to get it better and get more data coming in and grow it. I think actually I'm curious. Have you come across any frameworks or methodologies that look at that aspect of it, the validation aspect and the integrity, and then assuring that integrity going forward?
I have not come across any frameworks just yet, but that is part of the machine learning stage, the stage that I'm in now. So after the quantitative analysis is done and the data set is ready, I will be looking into a way to continuously ensure that moving forward with every iteration or every time it predicts something, it's still accurate and it's not losing its efficiency and its accuracy. So maybe starting off, I will look for a framework that's already doing this. That would be much easier. Or I will look into a way to automate it or figure out how it can just, the consistency remains, it remains consistent and the performance stays high. So maybe just continued ground truthing or just following up with a user case study just to see, like a prolonged case study, to see whether it loses its accuracy over time or not. And if it does, then tweak it, figure out how to improve it.
Right. Is there, or have you considered an approach to get more data? Like I know you mentioned about privacy and how you're not going to be able to share, or the only information that we shared will be limited. So there's a catch-22 here, right? To get access to more data, you need to have the ability to get that data, and that then introduces security and privacy issues that need to be looked at as well. And that's one of the biggest challenges in the machine learning space, right? Is the quandary between getting access to the data and then protecting that data. Any thoughts on that, Fiza, from your experience and what you've done?
So the Fitbit has it has a lot of sensors and a lot of data. This is just the data we're using. As per the data that can and can't be accessed, that's just for the end user of the mobile app. So it's just them deciding what their cared ones see. So the machine learning agent or our system, it will still have a lot of data. It'll have their vital signs, it'll have everything. But if they just want the part of their end users to be notified of, oh, check on this person, and they don't want to share any vital signs and they don't want to share any of their gait data or anything, they won't have to share it. But on our side, it's still accessible to us because we still have access to all the Fitbit data. We just need to use the APIs and just use the right scripts to fetch the data.
And sorry, last one, Elizabeth. And the data that you have, do you have information in there that associates it with particular individuals, or is it agnostic of the source?
So there was participant anonymity, but there was participant anonymity, but they were given a participant ID. So right now it was labeled, but with the training set, with the machine learning training set, it's not identifying any participant by ID. So it's not grouping them or anything. Just for our knowledge, just so we can compare the GDS and their mood scales and their readings and the correlations. We know, because I have different files for each participant, obviously. But when the machine learning agent is processing and it's being trained, it's not going to have any identifiers of such sort.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for this. Back to you, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Thanks, JP. How about the others? Catherine or Libby, if you got any questions?
Well, firstly, just to validate, the quality of the presentation's been really high, and also, even your responses to questions, great. You really know your stuff, so that's been enjoyable to watch. A lot of my questions have already been asked. I was curious about the sample size. One of my questions, and I totally understand why you exclude people with heart and sleep apnea and that sort of thing, is how representative of that age population then does your group become? And I don't know the stats myself, but I've got a feeling that is an issue. But I completely understand the reasons why you'd want to do that.
So that's just for the pilot studies, just for the preliminary data collection. Yeah. The aim is that over time, I get to improve the machine learning model or train it in a way that it becomes more of a personalized model. Yep. Where if they do have sleep apnea or any heart rate issues, it learns it and it knows that it's not an outlier and it's not indicative of this. Right. So that's something that I do plan on working on.
Wow. Great. That may require quite a complex model because they still may need help for the cardiac just as much as they need help for the depression. And potentially a generic call for help to a non-clinically qualified person may be the best solution. I do like the way you've actually controlled your study so far. I think that's actually quite good. And I agree with that the majority of elderly patients will have, in the Western world, at least a cardiac or respiratory condition, comorbidities. I think by the time you're 65, you should have one, and by the time you're 80, you should have 2. By the time you're 90, it's 3.
Yep, something I'll take into account, and maybe when I'm designing the mobile app, if there is a huge outlier or something very out of the ordinary, outlier in their heart rate readings or anything, they could still be sent out an emergency alert in case just something is very out of the ordinary. Please check on them.
Yeah, I'll just jump into that. Fiza, so I'm sure you're working with people who would give you good advice on this, but the ethical concerns with this area are huge, and particularly in terms of, even if you're collecting heart rate data for a purpose completely unrelated to observing people's health issues, if amongst that data there is an arrhythmia pattern, for example, that is an indicator of an underlying health condition, and you have that data but it's not provided to an appropriate medical practitioner, then it potentially exposes you to ethical risk. And so we have this where even it might be just a usability study of 18-year-olds. We have to have as a backup someone from our university health service who reviews all of the cardiac readings, just as a duty of care, so that we haven't accidentally collected something and then not taken appropriate steps to act on it. And so that may well be something, particularly as you start to process that just doing the consideration around the ethical concerns is likely to be significant.
That is true. The ethics process for us was actually very strenuous as well. We expected it to be just about a month. It ended up being 5 months. And it was because they wanted to cover all the bases and make sure that we weren't overlooking something that might be very concerning. And that is actually one of the reasons why we had to explicitly exclude people with any any history of heart attacks or any issues they've had that may impact these readings. And this was one of the reasons why it was done. One of them was because we wanted authentic data. Well, not authentic data, but data that's not going to alter our analysis. And also because they didn't want to be involved in something that is out of the scope of the study. And someone's physical issues like having a cardiac arrest or arrhythmia, it's out of the scope of the study. So it was very strenuous ethics process, but that's why we excluded people with any history of such sort.
And ethics committees will vary on how they interpret this. I have studies where I have seen things that are not related to the study, and I've gone back to the ethics committee because I felt terrible that we haven't been able to report it, and the ethics committee's made it very clear that wasn't the purpose of collecting the data, and you don't have I'm not a clinician, so I don't have a clinical obligation to do anything with that data, and in fact if I did, I'd be in breach of the research study.
That sounds different to what Karen was saying, in that she's just had somebody come in, but I mean that sounds like two very different approaches to the ethics.
And I think it depends on who sits on your ethics committee.
Absolutely. And it wasn't us that we were deemed to be, because we weren't coming from a health faculty, actually inappropriately qualified to be collecting and handling health-related physiological data that could be indicative of an underlying health condition. So we therefore then had to engage someone from our health service to basically just do a check of the data, and that was a requirement put upon us by our ethics committee.
I will take this into account. I'll
discuss
it.
But thinking more broadly, if this was to be used in an app, for example, and because of your machine learning, your training, that your algorithm didn't detect a potentially fatal condition, and then loved ones of that family member later find out they were using a technology that could have but didn't, it opens up a lot of vulnerabilities that I think, even if it's out, even just from as a technologist using a technology, we have a responsibility to understand how that technology may be used, and issues that might arise from the use of that technology. And so that's in addition to the normal mandate, which is more than collecting participant data.
So on that, I think it is worthwhile reading your state laws, because it's at state level these laws are held. So in Queensland, it's very clear. You only have that if you're a clinician. If you're a non-clinician, you don't have that at all. And in fact, to an extent that you don't have that responsibility.
Oh, right.
So you don't have the power to interpret. And my feeling for the clinician is they may not have the power to interpret either. So there are some rulings that universities have come down with that wouldn't stand up in the court. They're based on people's individual beliefs. And I have one study where we had to do 31 ethics applications, and we got 28 ethics results back from 31 applications. Everything from you can't do this study to this study shouldn't be coming through ethics, it should be mandatory to demonstrate that educational methods work. So we do have a major issue with ethics committees. They're there to provide us with guidance. We are the primary source of good science, good engineering, but there is a limitation as well to accountability. You must have gone through a process and demonstrated you have discussed with other people, got feedback on that, and have come up with something that's viable. The Fitbit collects lots of data that you're not responsible for. So you're only responsible for your AI data. And an example of where I could see ethics being very concerned is what happens if an insurance company has access to that decision. So for example, if on Facebook, the carer sends a message to the patient saying, I'm concerned, and then Facebook then provides that information to an insurer, then there is a problem. And that's about how we're going to manage ethical conduct of other people's private information. I see lots of stuff on Facebook from my friends, and I'll pick up the phone and call them and say, don't put that on your Facebook. Because, you know, if you go overseas, you may not be able to get insurance. And in fact, I do know of one case where they can't leave the country because of particular things that have happened, and no one will insure them. So that is more of a problem for us on our technological side, how we deal with it. But I do think it's worthwhile look at your state laws. Have a look at what the ethics committee said. Make sure you have it clearly, a copy of that. That's your defence. And remember that if you gave it to 10 ethics committees, you'd expect to get at least 5 different results based on the people there. You will be better off going to an ethics committee than not going to one on any study. So it is really important to go through that process, but it is still very limited. They're not professionals. They're not coached in the law. So we had a Queensland Health-wide one about this 31 sites not giving reliable responses or similar responses. And we brought up an expert from Canberra, a professor of ethics, and he set them a problem, and the majority of groups decided it was ethical to do the study, only it was illegal. So it's very important that just because people think something is morally all right, you need to look at your legal status on doing these things. There is a lot of stuff on Fitbits and how to use them legally. And so I think, you know, that's one of the important things to cover. I'm glad you went through a 5-month period with the ethics committee, because it gave you a lot of time to think through the logic about what you're doing, whether it's viable. And I think the harm that happens to patients because we're not doing studies is poorly taken into account in our ethics. And we need to start confronting ethics committees about that. So I think yours in general, there's going to be great benefit if you can get to the stage of having something that's easily wearable, similar to a watch, that can help people avoid going down the depression cycle, and just manage that sadness or early depression very, very early on, have the right support structure. So there's some great benefit what you want to do.
Thanks, Marcus. Pip, did you come up with it? Yes, she does. Hands up.
I always come up with something. Mine's not a technical issue. I don't have a doctorate. I'm not as fancy pants as some of the people here. My concern is for your well-being. This is a pretty intense project, not just a PhD in itself. It's a really, really full-on experience. Some of my friends have gone through it, and I've seen them come out changed and not always for the best. And also you're doing it on a really sensitive subject that's really close to your heart, and you're driven for the right reasons, but also I'm just wondering what you're doing about your own self-care, I suppose, and what sort of structure you have in place to help yourself because of the type of content you're doing and the effect that it might have on other people.
Well, I have really good supervisors, and my principal supervisor in particular does check in every now and then, because we have fortnightly meetings, and whenever there's very in-depth analysis and reading the participant interviews and stuff, he does check in, you know, are you good? Do you need some time off? And also, I mean, whenever I'm having a bad day, I do talk to friends, see a counselor every now and then.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's really important because you're doing really vital work, and it sounds like you're all over it. And certainly you've impressed the people in this small group.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you need to get to the end of it, and you get the end of it intact and be able to continue on with your good work. You know, not have it hamstring you personally. So that was all I had to say.
And there speaks an experienced nurse educator and health educator. Thanks, Pip. Great question. In fact, really good questions from everyone. Are there any other questions or comments? Karen and Marcus in particular, thank you for the conversation. I've learned heaps. When Fiza suggested her topic, I thought, yeah, I think I get it. Then I put the flyer out and thought, oh, I'm not sure I do. But this has been really helpful in understanding not just what it is that you're doing with your work, but as Marcus and Karen have said, all the issues about the ethics and the in-depth nature of it. And particularly PIPs, I totally agree with Pip. No matter what kind of doctorate you're doing, there are issues of challenge and health and stability and exhilaration and depression as you go through it. So I'm glad to hear that you're really working on that very well. And look, it's nearly time. I was just going to say thank you very much. You've really sparked a fabulous conversation. And if there are no other questions today, no, well, in that case, thank you all for coming. And Vinod has asked me some questions about SimCafes. He's curious as to why it's on at this time and whether there are other times. So can I just poll you guys really quickly before you go? I can tell you it's on at this time because it was started as a response to the pandemic, and 1 o'clock on Friday seemed a good time to stop and have a cup of coffee when we're all sitting at home. Now that we're all back, mostly back, and things are sort of returning to normal, is this still a good time for something like this? And if it is, then we can continue. But if it's not, are there some other suggestions? So you're all aware that it gets copied and recorded, and we put it up in YouTube. But are there any other issues? Should we change the format? We have now had we've got over 40 recordings, so it's turning into a really good library of resources, and I want to keep it going. But when's a good time?
I think for me, it's Friday is a really good time. Monday to Thursday, my world is close to insanity, trying to get things done. And I kind of look forward to it because I try to make myself at least stop and be here, even if sometimes I'm trying to deal with crisis on my email and maybe a little distracted, but it's the only time in the week I could possibly do it. Okay. I'm in Newcastle on a Friday, whereas during the week I'm in Sydney, and it's just way too much going on for me to even be allowed by my staff to stop and do something for my own learning and think about something in a different strategic kind of way in terms of education.
Thanks, Pip. Any other comments? I mean, I don't have any immediate plans to change it because we have a program scheduled out now to the end of the year, and I'll probably I'm aiming to have a loop of clips from the videos at the conference and the one day that we're together on the 11th of November at UTS, so that to just pick some pieces up and have a continuous loop so we get more people. So it's kind of settling into being part of our offering to members and things, and drawing people in. So please pass the word around, let people know. It won't be changed until the beginning of next year that I can see. Mark?
So it might be worthwhile surveying members. We used to have 30 to 40 people.
And it
when
drops.
we were in lockdown,
yeah.
And that quickly vanished after lockdown.
Yeah.
It's also worthwhile surveying whether they prefer just to watch the video. The other thing is potentially doing multiple sessions on the same topic within a week I wouldn't want to do this all the time, but as a little burst of having a presenter present multiple times so that more people could attend.
Sure.
And it would be very interesting to see how that affects the dynamics of the discussion. So I think with the smaller group, more people participate in the discussion. Yeah. When we had 30 or 40, people felt reluctant to speak up. Yeah. So maybe having more sessions may be more helpful, and especially on some of the PhD topics, different perspectives will be really, really important. Because a PhD is such a small study and so important to a person's understanding of research, but there may be really important perspectives that could make that easier, that would come from lots of small discussions rather than having 40 people in the room with you.
Sure. They're really good ideas. Has anybody else got any ideas or comments, things that you'd like to, some feedback for me so that I know where I'm going for the future?
Karen's got her hand up.
Oh, Karen, sorry.
I should just jump in.
Yes.
Yes, please do.
The only thing that I would like is I find I'm so time poor that I never have time for professional development. And sometimes when we hear about someone's research, I almost get research envy, because it's the thing. like, why can't I be doing research? Instead, I'm doing email and workloads and budgets. And so if we can intersperse in here, even inviting some of our members from, particularly from our industry members who might be providing technologies, to give a tech talk. Do you know what I mean? Just a quick, here's a cool thing that I think I would find value in that from a, I could learn how to do something I don't currently know how to do on a Friday, would be cool.
If you can suggest some people, I'll happily be in touch with them. With July, I have one person tentatively nominated, but the 2 dates in July are open at the moment. So if you could suggest, I can go.
No suggestions, and I think it's again a call out to the members, but rather than it being like a research, so I've been to a few, and they're great kind of, here's some project that I'm working on. But what it might be good to have is, project independent. Here's a bit of cool technology that I've started using in practice, and this is how I use it. And so just making that explicit might bring in a few different kinds of talks.
Thank you.
You can see I'm just looking for
that's
Friday training.
I knew if I posed the question, I'd get some good answers. So thank you.